Hey folks, Dennis Hancock here, Forage Extension Specialist at the University of Georgia, the Grassman, although I don't have any grass logo material on today. But we're stopped in traffic at the moment. Good road construction going on here, and I thought we'd shoot a little Grassman vlog about what we're going to see today. So Taylor, where we're headed?
Today we are headed to our last Alfalfa in the South workshop. This one is in Irwin County, and then the afternoon, the field tour, we're going to go and see Dan Glenn's farm, Deep Grass Grazers, in Fitzgerald. Yeah,
Dan's got some alfalfa that he's established in a couple different paddocks there. One that's Bulldog 505 and one that's Bulldog 805. So we're looking to see how it's interacting and how well it's playing with the Bermuda grass out there. Dan's been a grazer for past several years and really has done great work with his rotational grazing. So it's going to be interesting to see how it's come. But you know, we've had good success with these workshops so far. Yeah. We've seen a lot of different farms and how they're using the alfalfa in their system. What have been your thoughts about it?
I've been really excited. We've had great response from the people that have come so far. The producers have been great. We started off last week in Calhoun County with Ernie Ford. Saw Scott McCrae's farm first thing this week. Saw some of the research plots we have down in Tifton. So I'm really excited. I'm excited to see today since he's doing it a little bit different, using it for grazing.
Yeah, that's definitely it's not the way that most folks are using it, but I think it's a great ideal way of using alfalfa, because all these varieties that we're recommending are recommended for both grazing and for hay production. So we're getting back on the road. I guess we'll sign off for now. We'll show you a little video montage and we'll catch you down the road.
See ya.
When you're if you're going to try to put up this square belt, is there an ideal time? Because like I tried to cut this and it was real hard to dry it out back in I think it was the 1st of April, but it wouldn't hardly dry out and didn't have a mower conditioner. Is there more opportune time that it'll dry out faster? And what is the moisture range that is it like Bermuda hay, where you really want to get it down to 14% to try to put it in square hay?
Okay, good question, Zach. So that first cutting is going to be the devil, trying to get it dry enough for square hay. You may be able to get it for round hay and be fine. Most of our growers are going to make that a scrap off cutting. That would be for their livestock enterprise. They'd either make hay off of it or they would make baleage off of it. We try to make baleage off of it. It makes great baleage, and Taylor can talk about the quality of that. But starting right about now in May through really September and early October, most of the time you're going to have pretty decent drying conditions, you know, as long as you don't get into one of those stretches where it's raining every day or something like that. So for the most part, the rest of the cuttings could be dry hay. As far as the target moisture goes, in our environment, I really like to see that in that 15–16% range. But you don't have to go much lower than that. On alfalfa, you'll really start knocking leaves off of it if you go much lower than that. There are some preservatives that are out there to help keep the leaves on it. Some will use that, especially for beef cattle or dairy cattle or something like that. And there are some that are marketing these microbial inoculants that are basically just a dry powder that are blown into the chamber of the baler, and those kind of have had mixed results. Some cases they'll work, some cases they won't. It's highly variable. My default answer on that is really it's best to try to go ahead and shoot for that 15–16% moisture, and if you can get it to that level, you will minimize the risk of hay heating or molding, and you should be in pretty good shape. One thing I will say too, though, is that how you handle that, you know, is very crucial too. The conditioner greatly speeds up that drying rate. A light tedding early on in the process will help out quite a bit too, but you don't want to operate that tedder once it starts getting really dry, because you'll start knocking a lot of leaves off. The other thing is that to really maximize your leaf retention on this, is you need to rake this into a windrow when it's about 25% moisture or so, maybe even just a little wetter than that, and let it cure out the rest of the way in the windrow. Which means you don't make a really thick windrow like you would with alfalfa or with Bermuda grass. You try to make a shorter, slightly wider windrow so that it actually will dry down all the way through. Sometimes what will happen is the top will be crispy dry and the bottom will be moist, and you may end up needing to flip it. And I don't mean flip it all the way to the end of that rake, just turn it over is really what you're trying to do. The other thing to keep an eye on with this is your weather, obviously, but if it looks like today is not going to be quite dry enough. For example, I was in an alfalfa field on Friday afternoon, and it was 28% moisture. 3 o'clock in the afternoon, 28% moisture. It's not going to get to 16% by 6 o'clock that afternoon, that evening, before the dew starts influencing it and causes it actually to creep back up again. So, in that case, don't do anything with it. Wait till the next morning. Even with just a little bit of dew on, you can go out and flip that over and let that bottom dry out, and then hopefully by noon or 1 o'clock that day, you're ready to start baling it in. So keeping an eye on what that weather's going to do, and kind of thinking longer term, planning maybe even the next day what you're going to do. And some cases that means you've got to be out there raking at 4 o'clock in the morning, to be able to get it done, depending on how heavy that dew is going to be and what the relative humidity is for that evening. A couple things I want to point out too is that the stem size here is fairly large, and in the spring of the year these stems are going to be fairly large like this, which is one of the reasons why we do recommend a conditioner. Now, you don't have to have a conditioner, but it will greatly accelerate the rate at which this dries down. This stem is pretty thick. It's almost about half the size of a pencil, but this is one that I've just been working through my fingers to kind of simulate what would happen if you run it through in this case, a roller crimper style conditioner. And you can see for that one how much more surface area there is, particularly on those split ends here where the moisture is going to be able to escape from that stem. So that conditioner really makes a difference. Now, if we compare that to this, you can kind of see the advantage of that conditioner. Now, most of us have, I'll have to pull the whole thing up. Most folks will have a flail or impaler style conditioner, and those work too, but they're a little bit more hard on alfalfa. They're going to knock a few more of these leaves off. Just by hitting on this, oftentimes we're going to knock a few of these leaves off, but you can imagine running that through a flail, you're going to beat it up quite a bit, and you can see some of the shatter that's going to come off of that. But even with running it through a flail, you're going to break some of those stems, and you get some of those more of that surface area so that it dries down. I pulled 3 shoots here for to provide kind of a range so that you can kind of sense how these mature. But when I pulled one, I also noticed one other thing, which is this little ladybug is on here. Alfalfa actually hosts a lot of beneficial insects, whether it be ladybugs or, there's actually, if you were to take a sweep net through here, you would find a lot of biodiversity in the form of the insects that are here. Very few of those are really causing any damage to the alfalfa of any economic consequence anyway. So they can actually be a good reservoir for beneficial insects. But what I picked these for is to illustrate the difference in the maturity here. So this is a shoot that's a little later mature or later developed, starting much later than the rest of these. And the way to kind of mature or to stage this is to feel up in the top of it to see if you can feel anything. So feel at the very top of that one, just all the way up to kind of just pinch it between your fingers all the way up. And you don't really feel any knot to it at all, do you?
Not much.
All right, so this one is a little bit more advanced. Feel that same area right there and just kind of roll it between your fingers, and what you'll feel is something like a BB. It feels a little harder right there.
Right, yeah.
That's the bud. That's the formation of the bud, and eventually this is what will form from that. So that's ultimately what we're starting to see is the flowers, and of course many of these are fully advanced and has more than 3 flowers that are open on an individual stem. So in this case, it's very much 75% bloom, and by this point, as much of the carbohydrate reserves and nitrogen reserves as possible are socked back down into that taproot. So there's really no reason to delay harvesting beyond this, and certainly the quality is going to start dropping now, especially because we're beginning to lose leaf material at this point at a pretty rapid clip.
Let me point out something there, Dennis, too. I was just talking to Will. What happens, we were fortunate that we couldn't breed any varieties in the state of Georgia or Florida or whatever that didn't have tolerance to the main problems that start happening in the spring, and that is the leaf spot. And one reason when it goes to mature, they finally start, you can see it gets a little yellow looking, and they start dropping. And of course you're losing yield because of the leaves. It's another reason to cut at the right time. But if you can see this, there's a, this one has some very small lesions on the leaves. It is starting to turn yellow. That's just common leaf spot, or what they call pseudophysiae. This one, the lesions are bigger. They tend to, see that lesion right there? That's called Cercospora. So a lot of the same problems they have in peanuts, you have them here because we've grown a lot of peanuts. And then of course this one has a little of both. It has both. But the Georgia bred varieties, in other words, we never could select a plant. If we were selecting good looking plants out of our nurseries, we sure weren't taking anything that had lesions. And so, and it's so much, we didn't even have to inoculate. There's just natural inoculum everywhere. So, and even when we sent them off to places, I remember we sent some germplasm to South Africa where they had a lot of leaf spots, and our stuff just topped the test there because it had more tolerance to it. It would take longer to develop the lesions or whatever. So as long as we were operating within the regular harvest windows, we didn't have any problems. But you can see that even though this variety's got fairly good tolerance and some resistance, if you go too long, it finally starts breaking down. It's more of a tolerance mechanism than a resistance. Or I should say immunity. It's not an immunity situation. And it's good because then you don't drive the pathogen to try to change on you.
First of all, do you see those little white specks there on the crown itself? Those are the nodules. That's what's doing the nitrogen fixation. Now, if I were to pull up the whole plant, we would see a whole lot more nodulation than what I'm able to show you right here, because it gets more nodulation, especially on these finer roots out to the side.
Me and Whit been talking about chicken litter on this stuff. Yep. Now I'm getting ready, like I say, this new dirt coming straight from being cleared up. Can I come in there with chicken litter and start?
Yep, not a problem. It's a good source of phosphorus and potash. The thing about chicken litter is if you, well, any nitrogen source that goes out there, if the nitrogen is available in the soil, the alfalfa is kind of lazy. It's not going to fix nitrogen if it's available. Okay. It's a very energy expensive prospect to fix nitrogen.
But it'd be good to get it.
Oh, it's fine. Yeah, it's fine. It's not going to hurt anything. But what will occur is it's not going to fix any nitrogen if it doesn't have to.
Okay.
So you may not have as much nodulation, but as long as it's nice and green and healthy like these plants are, then it will continue to grow and do just fine. Now, when it runs out of nitrogen, it will start to create new nodules and recruit new bacteria, and it will restart that nitrogen fixation process. Okay. It's kind of interesting, I think, the relationship between the bacteria in the soil and the plant roots. That's why we inoculate it, and Jennifer talked a little bit about inoculation earlier today, but we inoculate it just to make sure that we have plenty of those bacteria near the roots. Those bacteria are actually naturally around, and if you got good organic matter in your soil, you probably got quite a bit, but those bacteria actually have to migrate toward the root.
Okay.
It's kind of interesting because the root, once it's trying to establish, it will send out a chemical signal saying, hey guys, I'm over here, come this way, let's do a little dance, and those bacteria will gravitate to where that root is, and they'll give a signal, and the bacteria will say, we're here, and the root then will start what is known as what ends up being the nodule, and it'll wrap itself around those bacteria, and once it's kind of wrapped around, those bacteria will infect with a thread. There's what they call an infection thread. That infection thread will go right into the cortex of the root, right into the heart of the root. And once that is completely encapsulated, once those bacteria are completely enclosed in the absence of oxygen, the nitrogen gas that's in the air can actually still get through, and it fixes that nitrogen, but it has to be in the absence of oxygen for it to work.
Okay.
So it's really, I think it's kind of a very interesting look into nature, just how that all works. See these little, that's the beginning of the next shoots. The next shoots to come off that crown are beginning to form. There's two right there. There's probably some more on this backside too. There's one that's getting ready to start. There's one that's getting ready to start. But all those are that's your next crop that's already starting to come on. Actually, I misspoke. That's actually part of the next crop. The next crop is actually these smaller ones. If you pull back some of these plants, let's see if we can get to an area we haven't been tromping down. Try to gently pull these plants up so you can see the base of the plant.
See the little babies.
So these are the babies, yep. These are this is your next crop right here. Now, because this is a little bit more of advanced maturity, this next crop, this next group of shoots are a lot taller than what they normally would be. Normally, at 10% bloom, they're going to be more like these down here at the bottom. So that's your next crop right there. This is the next crop. So your cutting height becomes important. When you come in and cut this, you don't want to scalp it all the way down to the ground and cut those off. You want to leave some of this material there for it to grow back from.
How do you deal with your cows grazing then? You just can't let them graze that low, right?
Good question. Yeah, so in a scenario like this, they're going to kind of slurp this up like spaghetti. They're not really going to, in this situation, they're not going to have as much access down there deep.
Yeah.
But pulling them off before they start grazing down that deep into the canopy is going to be very, very important. So
how many cuttings a year do you think you'd get off this?
generally in South Georgia here we can get anywhere from 6 to 8, and there are some that would push it and get maybe 10. But now I'm not going to suggest that. I think for the average beef cattle guy, 6 cuttings, 7 cuttings is probably a realistic thing. A dairyman might push it a little bit more and try to get 10. Commercial hay guy might want to push maybe 8 to 9, something like that, depending on the scenario.
For reference, the first year we had the alfalfa we established in February, and then so we delayed and kind of let it get better established. So we got 5 cuttings that year in 2016, and of course that's what the year it got established, and we were in really severe drought, and it was not under irrigation except to make sure it was going to keep going. Last year, however, since it did get warm a lot earlier and stayed kind of warm, we were able to get 8 cuttings. We started in March and cut the last week of October.
Tate, on the, you said you got 8 cutting off it. Were the latter cuttings more Bermuda than they were alfalfa, or they?
So in In July and August, we had a lot more Bermuda.
Okay.
It still didn't drop down to where there was only, you know, we talked about that 30% kind of threshold.
Right.
It never dropped that low on alfalfa, but maybe like 40% alfalfa.
Okay.
But then once you got into September, October, the alfalfa actually picked back
Pick
up.
back up? Oh,
As it
okay.
started getting a little bit cool in this, the day length got shorter.
Oh, okay.
That's the real advantage, I think, to alfalfa, is that it's really the only thing that's going to be that productive in October and November and early December. It's, you know, nothing else that we grow will produce that much in September, October, November. Certainly not the kind of quality that this is too. But, you know, if Bermuda gets about 6 or 8 inches tall and it stops growing, it's not going to start growing again. There's too much shade there. If it gets so drought stressed that it's starting to dry off and it stops growing, it's not going to try to grow out of that. Alfalfa, however, though, that next crop of shoots will turn on. If you get just a little bit of regrowth and it dries up so much that even the alfalfa will stop growing, then once you do get a drought-ending rain, it will just jump right back out. So it actually recovers quite well from that. To me, the most striking thing is the difference between that Tifton 85 and this alfalfa cut at the same time 10 days ago. I mean, this is why we can really have alfalfa being really competitive with Bermuda grass, because it just jumps right back, even in especially in dry conditions, but even in wet conditions, it's just that much faster to jump out and get going.
And so we use a 3-inch cutting height, and that's going to be what we're going to recommend with these mixtures for sure. And that's the other thing that we do see, that quick return or that quick growth. And also, even on our Tifton 85 plots, I know some people like to get that a little bit lower because it is Bermuda grass, and we keep it at a 3-inch height just because the comparison of the yield and those types of things, we're going to treat them all the same, with the exception that those get nitrogen. But we see a benefit also of keeping that higher growth on that Bermuda grass, so it doesn't have so much of a lag time to get up and growing. So we're seeing a benefit of that in both of our mixtures, as well as in the care of just our 85.
Yeah,
now, the cutting that we did on the 85 was just, again, a clean off cutting. It was mostly annual ryegrass. As you can see, it is just starting to green up. So 85 is a little bit later on that wake up time, except for it was already really awake in February this year.
Yeah. But I mean, it should be growing really quick now. And even with normal Bermuda grass, we recommend a 3-inch cutting height. It's very important to leave a little bit of grass out there. Grass grows grass. It is interesting because what happens in the cows is that the nitrogen level in the rumen, the ammonia level, the nitrogen status of that animal actually peaks, and they sense they need to go somewhere else, and they'll graze on this for a little while, then they'll go over here and pick some grass. So if you can kind of use it strategically. Dr. Tucker's predecessor there at Tifton used alfalfa as a creep grazing system. So he had 4 pastures of coastal and 4 pastures of Tifton 85, and they were comparing the two. And then right in the middle, he had a block about the size, probably about a third the size of this field, that was right in the middle that all 4 pastures could get into. So he rotated among those 4 pastures, and the calves could get in to creep graze on the alfalfa. And they would graze on it for a little while, and then they'd go back over to where Mom was at and graze on grass. And the advantage of that, of course, is that you really only have to fertilize and improve that 1 acre or that 2 acres or whatever that percentage is. You didn't have to improve the entire pasture. So that's one way of doing it. You know, if you're making hay, like in this case, or baleage in this case, you'd want to have the whole field, of course. Something else I wanted to point out is we do get some wildlife damage from time to time. This is one that's
I can imagine.
planted. Now, I've only encountered 2 situations where the wildlife damage was too much on a significant scale. Now, if you've got something around 5 to 8 acres or smaller, and you're the only one around that's got alfalfa, you might have the world's largest food plot. Okay. Now, The record, though,
Come to take
the record is actually over at Lake Blackshear at Cordele. One of our growers there, one of our commercial hay growers, had an 80-acre field that bordered the state park, which is the wildlife management area, and actually three sides of the field, with just a little corner of the field was not surrounded by this wildlife management area. He sent me a picture, a text message one night of his he had a thermal imaging camera set up there. He was trying to kill some hogs too, but he counted over 200 deer in that one 80-acre field. So, you know, in that situation, when there's not that much pressure on them and they got plenty of reserve, they're going to have a, but you know, just down the road from where he was at, maybe 5 miles, he had another large field and very, very little damage. So, you know, and in North Georgia, we had, Joe was talking about Ricky Roper. He had about an 8-acre field, and it kind of went to a point in the field. It was surrounded by woods up at that point, and there was a nice edge to the alfalfa. It just sloped right up about 20 feet from the edge of the field, where the deer population was grazing out the edges. But you know, once you get up above about 8 acres or so, you really don't see enough damage typically for there to be any noticeable yield impact.
That's one thing we've noticed over the years, just like Dennis said, just reinforcing what he said. If you got a lot of woods bordering, and they're gonna, that's where they are. And then they come out at night and graze, and they tend to graze the first 20 feet, you know, because they want to hug those woods. So it's almost like if you're right next to the woods, you almost got to give them the first 20 feet. You know, they're going to take it, you might as well give it to them.
Yep.
But, you know, when they start, every once in a while we hear horror stories that it's become the largest food plot in the world, you know, and that's true. It doesn't happen very often, thank goodness. Most of the time when we hear from farmers, you know, I always ask them, do you have any problem with deer? Yeah, I see them, but they're mostly hugging the woods, and you know, I'm still getting good yields off the most of the field. So,
could you drill it the first year, drill it the next year, come back in November, drill it again to get a thicker? No, just a one-time deal and go, right?
Yeah. The issue is that that alfalfa plant, this alfalfa plant right here, any seed that's within about 3 feet of that plant will not be able to germinate.
Gotcha.
And take off. And it's what's known as autotoxic. It actually exudes a chemical that suppresses its own seedlings from growing right there in its shadow.
Okay.
Now, that being said, if I were doing a full stand of just alfalfa, what I would do is I would cross hatch it. I would drill in one direction and I would drill in the other direction. That's for two reasons. One is to make sure I kind of evened out the stand. The second reason is that gives me better coverage over the soil and keeps less sand from contaminating the alfalfa when I get ready to harvest it. When you take a disc mower over top of bare sand, over the top of alfalfa with bare sand underneath it, that disc mower has a vortex effect that sucks sand right out of the soil. And it really makes a high ash content in the feed, which is one of the reasons why we really like this alfalfa in Bermuda grass, is because you basically have a carpet underneath the alfalfa, and you prevent a lot of that contamination from getting into the seed or into the pore.
I understand why it's not in the Bahia, because you don't.
Well, in Bahia, if we interseeded alfalfa into Bahia, we would have. In fact, there's some Bahia right there. And there's some alfalfa growing in it. I mean, it will work.
It's very competitive.
I just happened to notice there was Bahia there at the feed on it.
Yeah.
So it'll work. Oh yeah, absolutely.
Been cut before, and just to give you an idea of where we're at here, running this away is my potassium fertilization rates, and I'll go ahead and label them for you. So we've got this column here has had 90 pounds per acre. This one had 60, this one had 120, this one had nothing, and this one had 150. And then running along longitudinally, we have some signs here you guys can walk around and see too. This is my harvest interval. So this one here, should be about the shortest one. This was harvested at 50% bloom, and that was a couple weeks ago. This one was harvested at 10% bloom, which was back in April. And then this one was harvested at bud stage. This was obviously my first harvest. I think I got April 6th. And then this last one here was 30% bloom. And this plot here is replicated 4 more times along the way, but they're all in different orders, so that's why you don't see them exactly the same as you're going. But I just labeled this one because it's a lot of signs.
Talk about the timing. So we have these numbers, but these are split applications. So with our potassium, we're always going to recommend splitting that application. As Dennis mentioned, it's a luxury consumer of potassium, so it's not just a one shot at the front. We do it 3 times throughout the season.
Yeah, so that's a good point. Like you said, we split these applications. So for example, the 90 pounds to the acre, we'll get 30 pounds to the acre before the first cutting, after the second cutting, and before the last cutting. So 3 times during the season. And the bud stage there, that third row, we should expect a little bit more growth since this is about a month. But if you guys look in the plot, we've had quite a bit of deer eating my alfalfa. So it's a little bit smaller than we would like. And again, you guys have some information in your packets that shows some data from last year. And like I said, we can't make any inferences yet on what our results look like, but you can notice some differences just visually. I just like to look at things in the field, and you can see that some of this that has gotten no potassium, the stand just looks a little bit thinner than, like, for example, this one next to it that's gotten 120 pounds to the acre. So again, I'll just reiterate what everyone said to you so far. Please fertilize with potassium. It's important.
What it was is that eventually that taproot will break through that compacted zone. In fact, the studies will show that a steel shank can only break, and I'm going to give you in megapascals, that's the values that they use. A steel shank can only break about a 1.5 megapascal compaction zone. A plant root can go to 3 megapascals and break through it. And if you think about it, as you've driven through mountainous areas and all the rock and facings and that sort of thing, you've seen trees and things that are growing on those rocks, and tree roots breaking through those little cracks and fissures and making it larger. Roots can do amazing things if we give it an opportunity. In this case, if we ran that aerator through an area where there was where those taproots are at, you'd actually do a lot of damage to those taproots. Gotcha. And eventually that alfalfa plant will find its way through anyway. We run into that also at the old plant science farm in Athens. We would oftentimes have real challenges the first 18 months to 2 years because of a compacted zone there, about 6 to 8 inches deep. And eventually it'd find its way through it, and it'd break through, and it'd be fine. And the yields were fantastic.
So if you aerate, do it before you drill.
If you're aerating it, do it before you drill, exactly.
Took a tie drill and drilled these new seeds. You could literally see them whenever you were standing up. So we barely touched the soil surface. They were very shallow. We tried to shoot for between an 1/8 to 1/4 inch depth, and then it also rained a couple days after planting, so it kind of got that back into the soil. Yeah.
And that seed has to imbibe about 150 to 200% of its weight in water to germinate. So it has to have really, really good seed to soil contact to make it work, and having the rain shortly thereafter.
I was going to say, if you do something like that, what we have done up at home is we've taken a chain and put it around behind your roller and pull that chain, just old log chain, and it stirs a little. And I know a couple of people that I've worked with up there, we've had good luck doing that.
And now, as Dennis was pointing out, and has we are seeing some insect damage, and so Kaylin's going to get some insecticide out on this this week as soon as we can on that. We aren't as concerned about threshold in our research trials, because if you can tell a plot or a treatment is within this small area here, and so even a small impact of insects can have a big impact on our results. So we try to keep that as limited, but I'm not sure what we would be at on threshold, but I am seeing a lot of three-corner leafhopper damage in here.
And the coloration that you see here is kind of the end result of that. This is the beginning stages of that. And I'll pass this around, but if you look just at the base of where one of these leaves attaches to the stem, you will see where an insect has stuck in its little sucking parts there. There's a little black spot there. It's hard to see, but you want more leaf
three-corner leafhopper. And we tend to see that quite a bit in all of our plots here.
Yeah. That's more of a problem here in South Georgia than any of the other leafhoppers would be. And even here, you can see it's pretty mild. It's not really a major thing, but being a research plot, there's zero. The threshold is 0.
You control everything you can from a research standpoint.
And, I think sometimes that's where farmers, we all go wrong, is we're not willing to be patient and give stuff a chance and let it work for us. Yep. But don't try to do it in a classroom where everything has to be ideal conditions, because this classroom out here is not ideal and it's not very forgiving sometimes, and we just have to work with what we have.
Well, that's the whole reason why we're doing these workshops. It's one thing for us to do that research on a small scale, or even Taylor's plots are a couple acres, but doing that on a 200-acre field, or even a 15 or 10 to 15 acre field, it's important for us for farmers to see it on other farmers' land. So we appreciate you having us and hosting us for this. So the visit to Dan's went just as well as some of the others have gone. We had a great turnout there and a great visit. Very interesting things going on in those fields, wouldn't you think?
Yeah, it was definitely interesting to see, especially since he had planted 2 different varieties, the Bulldog 805 and the Bulldog 505. So there was definitely some differences between the 2 fields.
Yeah, it was kind of interesting. He planted a little bit with the Bulldog 505, which is not something that we necessarily would recommend, but it did seem to, still establish it really well. And there was some crimson clover there. There was some hairy vetch that kind of has come in volunteer from previous planting, but the 505 has come in pretty strong. And it was kind of interesting because the 505 actually ended up, it's not quite as fast as the 805. The 805 area was a lot faster, and maybe has grown a little bit faster earlier this spring. And despite all that competition, the 505 is doing really, really well, and the 85 underneath it was looking pretty strong too, wasn't it?
Yeah, I was actually really surprised, I guess, because it is a little bit slower coming on. The 85 is really taking its chance and looks really good underneath.
Yeah. I mean, underneath it actually looked better even than what we've seen at Tifton. So I was very impressed by that. The Tifton 85 under the Bulldog 805 alfalfa was a little bit further behind though. And I think he had a little bit more ryegrass competition there as well. But in both cases, it's rocking right along, green as a gourd. It really does look great. So, but anyway, we've had a fantastic week here with the Alfalfa in the South workshops. Just hope you've enjoyed this video montage we put together, and we'll see you down the road.
Take care.